Welcome to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
And I am your other co-host, Josh. And Mark, what are we talking about on this episode?
We are talking about the Salem-horror-fest.
So this is going to kind of break a little bit of our traditional mold. On this episode in particular, as Mark said, we're going to be talking about films that we have both individually watched and covered for this year's Salem-horror-fest. Just note that this is a very small percentage of the films that were actually shown this year. It's going to include both short films and feature films. And also, this is going to be as spoiler-free as we can make it. So, Mark, what do you got up first for us?
So, with this so far, we have had movies that are great and some that are just atrocious. And the first one I got is Brain Death. It falls in the latter category. The synopsis we were given is after the disappearance of her girlfriend, a young trans woman comes into contact with an ancient evil. That's the synopsis they give you about the movie. The problem was none of that is really made clear in the movie. It doesn't make any sense. And I almost felt like I was living up to the name of the movie and was going brain dead. I don't know if it's just the fact that it's a movie that's not for me and I just didn't get it, or that it wasn't good. But yeah, Brain Death. A 0 out of 5 for me. I couldn't recommend this to anybody unless you need a cure for insomnia.
So I'm curious, like what is it in particular that just makes this film so bad? Is it the fact that is it the performances? Is it the way that the narrative is structured or presented? Is it the acting? Is it the writing?
It's almost a combination of all of it. You go from strange scenes with people in very obvious like masks and stuff that I guess are supposed to be the evil entity, to like FaceTime chats, to pixelated screens and outings at clubs, and none of it really makes sense. It jumped on the bandwagon of being basically, and y'all know me, I don't like political statements in my stuff, but it was very clear it was anti-conservative and anti-Trump. That was made very clear in the very beginning of the movie, and I just don't want political crap in my movies to begin with. I'm watching a movie to be entertained, not to be preached to. And that was a running theme through the whole movie, and the story was confusing and not clear what was going on. It jumped all over the place. It couldn't get out of its own way for trying.
It almost kind of sounds like you're saying that like this movie really lacks conviction and vision to
it lacks
stick
any
the landing.
sort of it's almost like it doesn't know what it wants to be.
So
and that's really about it. It jumps all over the place so badly that nothing is clear as to what's going on.
So I'll also echo your sentiment. Obviously when you do festivals like this, you're going to get like really great films, as I will talk about later, about how some of the films that are on my list that I covered actually ended up being, honestly, legitimately, one of them is in my top 5 for the year. I got to catch that film at Genre Blast, and it was just such a fun film to get to see this time, the second time around. But the first film that I'm going to actually talk about is on on my low list. This year, not just for this year, but Yeah, just this year. Um, and that is a movie called What Happens Next Will Scare You. And this movie basically tells the story of this dying website, essentially, that is looking for a cash grab to bring in more views, which will allocate more funds and sponsors. And they, it tries to set itself up to be this almost like VHS styled anthology film where every writer is basically trying to showcase the scariest video on the internet. And then all of the things that they show are like come to pass. And I don't know, it's very scattered. It is currently listed as the 5th worst film I've seen this year.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and that list is 194 films as of this recording. Basically, my biggest problem with this film is that it, much like we were talking about with Brain Death, like it really seemed to lack vision. And I don't know particularly what it is about this movie that, for whatever reason, like it just seemed to. It was just a really sloppily put together movie. It was very poorly acted. And honestly, like I tweeted, when I tweeted out my initial thoughts on this, I said, I would recommend just skipping this one, signing up for Shudder, and watching the latest VHS film, which is VHS 94. Because this film, it just, like I said, it tries to embrace every single horror subgenre, whether you're talking about found footage, clowns, witches, creepy puppets. It tries to embrace everything, and in the end, it just becomes a cornucopia of just sloppiness.
So did it fall into what I've kind of started calling the anthology trap? A lot of these anthology movies like that just end up being disconnected because it's just a bunch of random stories. Sometimes they tie them back together to a main story. Very few seem to do it right.
It absolutely is that, and that's my biggest problem. And I've said it in my reviews for Victims and Villains, and I've said it at conventions. I'm just not a huge fan of anthology films because, in my opinion, it takes a lot to make an anthology film special. And if you're going to do something like Creepshow or like Tales of the Crypt, like I can get behind those because all of those films have this energy that they know that they're not connecting. But what for films like this, and even for VHS, like I'm not the hugest VHS fan, but the things that don't work specifically about this is that you try and connect it, and also try to create a narrative on top of that connective tissue, and it just doesn't work. A lot of it is like this like subplot of like trying to make the videos come to life, kind of almost like a possession style story. And then there's one final twist, and that final twist just really got under my skin. And by the time that final twist happens, it's already too late. Like this movie has just lost me. Like I said, if it had presented itself as something that it was just a straight anthology film, I could have gotten underneath. I could have been a little bit kinder to this. But this film, for me, it's going to get a 0.5. And the reason why it's going to get that way is just because it's poorly constructed. It's structured very abysmally.
Well, that sounds terrifying for all the wrong reasons.
It is. But what do you got? What's next up on your list?
So I watched another one called Caucasoid that kind of sounded like it could be interesting. Um, it's about a guy, Andrew, facing like a family crisis, comes back to town, and he has a goal to kill all the white men. And I don't say that sarcastically. That's actually part of the story. He's out. He's a white guy that's determined white men are the problem in America, and he needs to kill them all. Um, for that kind of outline for a movie, you would think there would be more action. I will say it did have some pretty good traditional effects for what sequences they did have. Outside of that, it's a lot of his inner monologue and craziness talking and walking around and just very slow and dull, and very little going outside of his own inner monologue complaining about why all these people need to die and stuff like that. It's it's another one. It wasn't a lot better than Brain Death. Um, like I said, it had some decent traditional effects in it for what little bit it did have, but outside of that, it was a drag. It was slow, not much going on, and just generally a bore of a film for me.
See, I don't mind it if films are like slow to present their story, but if you're not actually going to have any payoff, which it doesn't sound like this film had any payoff.
There wasn't much at all. It was slow burn without the burn. So, I mean, that should tell you something right there. I'm kind of a fan of that genre, but this doesn't even fit in that. It was just slow without the burn. Um, the only reason I'd give it a 1 out of 5 is it had a couple sequences that were pretty decent for the traditional effects and the way they did a couple kill scenes. Outside of that, it's uh, yeah, you're not missing nothing.
So, am I to understand that you're just going to go ahead and get the bad movies out of the way and then eventually build to the good ones, or what's your plan here?
My plan here is pretty much going down the list of the order that I watched them in, except for a couple.
That's fair.
Uh, and it
That's
just so
okay.
happened that those were the first two that I watched. So that was my first taste of Salem-horror-fest, was two completely chore of a movies to get through.
I'm so sorry. My next one is also going to be a chore of a movie, and this one let me down for a number of different reasons. So the next one that I'm going to cover is called 645, and basically it tells the story of a couple that, in an attempt to save their relationship, takes a vacation, and in this vacation, it's basically Happy Death Day, where they end up dying continuously and having to relive that until they find out how to stop it. And the reason why I say that this was such a extra big letdown for me was because of the first week in August, this film had actually gotten picked up from Regal Cinema to play exclusively at their locations. And I love indie movies. So if I can go ahead and get to support indie cinema, I'm all about it. So I was really looking forward to it because it's one of the very few trailers this year that I've watched, and the trailer just really sold me for it. And none of the Regals in my area actually played it. And so I was really disappointed by that fact. And so when I saw that it was part of the coverage that we were able to request for it, I got really excited. I was beyond stoked to see this film. And this film is a lot like what you're talking about with Caucasoid. Like, it's a very slow burn. And it's not just a slow burn, it's a predictable burn. I knew exactly how this movie was going to end probably 45 minutes into this movie. The this is what Happy Death Day would be if it was filled with more sex, and if it was void of just any fun and any purpose.
Because Happy Death Day at least had character to it and was entertaining, very highly entertaining.
Happy Death Day is one of my favorite slashers that we've seen in the last 10 years. It's absolutely it's a freaking blast.
And they make no bones about the fact that they're kind of imitating. In the first one, they're imitating Groundhog's Day. The second one, Back to the Future. They're just blatant about it. So this didn't fall into that at all. They didn't even acknowledge that they were taking credit from other movies for a concept, and it just kind of made it not very good in the meantime.
No, this is and I think what's possibly one of the most awkward things about this movie is the fact of like how much sex is actually intertwined into this.
Did it play a part in the actual story, or is it like with a lot of horror movies where it's just there because it's one of the rules of horror?
So I kid you not, the first 2 minutes of this movie is just a really long sex scene. Like that is the very first thing you see. That's how the credits are rolling and just distributing, like who produced it, who wrote it, who's starring in it, who's doing the music, who's editing it. Like all of that was right with a long sex scene. And I was like, okay, that's fine, whatever. That's fine, an artistic choice to make. And then they come back to it, and then there's a montage of sex and board games that like doesn't legitimately need to be in here. And possibly one of the most like frustrating things about this movie is the fact that there's no chemistry between the lead actors. So like and look, if you're trying to save your relationship, the choices that these characters make are not how you do it. It is this movie fails on nearly every cylinder, and it's just no. Just skip this movie and watch Happy Death Day, because this movie feels like a parody of greatness, and it is so painful to watch. And I'm also going to give this one a 0.5 out of 5.
So the one thing people have to remember listening to this is our first 4 movies have been not good.
I promise I'm building up to the good stuff.
But it's also our taste in movies as well plays a part in it. So we may not like these, but other people may.
I wouldn't necessarily even say that, because when I'm looking and when I'm critiquing a film myself, I might not necessarily enjoy the film, but I'm looking at the bare bones of the film. How's the chemistry? How does the music fit in? How's the acting? How's the writing? Is it, does it look visually appealing? Does the character decisions make sense? Is there character development? If it's a horror movie, is it actually scary? Like those are the things that I look for in something like this. Like a great example of my taste in movies and versus like my mind as a reviewer. Like I'm not necessarily the biggest person when it comes to musicals, but when I watched Hamilton earlier this year, I wasn't the biggest fan of it, and I'll probably never watch it again. But I'm also not going to deny the fact that it's a solid at 4-star, if not a 5-star film, because the acting's good, the music's good, it's paced well, character development is immaculate. Like there's so much things about it, but I acknowledge that I'm not the perfect person. I'm not the audience for it, and I don't know. It's funny because like when I went on to for 645 in particular, even when I went to like log it into Letterboxd, like everyone was talking about how much of a waste of the time this film was. So I don't think this
Okay.
film has found its audience.
Okay. Well, that's a little different. But okay.
What
So
do you
we're
got
back.
next?
We're back to me now. All right. So I got one that I actually liked. Two Witches.
Okay.
It borders on being an anthology, but it's more like an anthology like Trick or Treat is, as opposed to like mm, what is it, Field Guide to Survival or the VHS movies.
Okay.
So it's various stories that revolve around a basic plot line, and it takes place in three parts. Um, it is a basically an elder witch that is dying, and her abilities are passing on to other people, and it's causing all kinds of weird havoc. Like I said, it takes place in three parts. You've got your beginning part dealing with one couple and a curse that's being triggered because of this witch dying. And it's pretty brutal the way it happens. It plays a little bit on paranoia for the first segment, and it's fairly graphic. Um, Not so much violent, but just the way things go down is bloody. And the whole movie, there's just this underlying feeling of like dirtiness. And I don't mean like unnecessary sex scenes like you were talking about. I mean like when they show some of these people that you're assuming are the witches, they're just grimy and they make you feel dirty for watching it. And then
Oh,
it
so you mean Rob Zombie's Halloween?
kind of. Then it moves into the second segment, which takes place a younger girl, and she's basically inheriting these powers. Okay. And she is bad shit. She's crazy. Without giving anything away, that's really the only way to put it. She's crazy and she's power hungry. And some of the things she does is just like, wow. If you ever seen the old 90s movie, the thriller Single White Female,
Hmm.
it'll remind you of that, some of the stuff she does. And then add on top of it her gaining these powers. And then you get the third act, which is the payoff of everything coming together. Um, it's an interesting story. It's very well done. It's evenly paced. It's not like one segment you're like bored through. The next one is like, oh, this is pretty cool. It's fairly well paced all the way through, and when it ties everything together and you figure out exactly this is what's going on, they give you little clues through each segment, and it was a good one. I liked it. I might watch it again sometime to see what all I may have missed. Because you know how some of those movies are like that. You watch it the first time, it's like, oh, that was cool. And then you watch it again and see stuff that you missed. And this is one of those that could be that way. And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say I've more recently noticed that with some of the things that like on subsequent like rewatches of like Halloween Kills, like how much detail like I missed on my first initial viewing, and so sometimes like if you really like a film, like go back and like rewatch it because I feel like you see things differently and you're able to pick up on new things that you might have missed the first time.
And I kind of feel like Two Witches is going to be one of those. That seeing it again, I'm going to pick up on stuff that I might have missed the first time. I'd probably give it's not a fantastic movie. It's a good movie. 3.5 out of 5.
I mean, I still say that's a strong film. Um, compared to some of the other things we've talked about on here, and I will see your strength and also match it with my next one. So this next one is it's not quite a short film, but it's not quite a feature length. It's kind of like that sweet middle spot. It's got a runtime of like 29 to 30 minutes, and it is called Snapper, the man-eating turtle movie that never was. I don't know if I got that subline wrong, but basically it's a short documentary that recounts the story of this movie that almost got made in 1989 and fell through for a number of different reasons. And they share like screen tests and kind of like how the project came to be, and really ultimately like why the project fell through, and like how it almost kind of like reappeared, and like how there's still hope for it. And I love and I am fascinated by movies that almost got made. I think that the Death of Superman, when we did that last year for That's High Praise, that was one of my favorite episodes to podcast about last year. I love that movie. I absolutely love the notion of like unmade Halloween movies, and like the just like Phantom Limbs on Bloody Disgusting is like a favorite of mine, and Development Hell from the Dread Central Podcast Network is another great one. But this one was so fascinating because this came when you look at horror in '89. Horror is in this like kind of like weird purgatory where we're not quite doing creature features anymore. Possession films aren't quite the norm anymore, and slashers are kind of becoming a parody of themselves. And so to kind of see a movie that should have come out in like 79 or like 80 or even 81 in 1989 would have been fascinating to me. And the fact that you're able to see like screen tests and like storyboards, and like the director and writer like actually walking you through what the movie like would have been, and even like getting to see like the test trailer that they did to try and sell it. Like this is such a cool concept, and it legitimately makes me hold out hope that this movie still could get made, because it just looks like a fun time.
So you're hoping for like, what is it, Grizzly 2, that's been in development for like 20 or 30 years, and they're finally talking about releasing it. That's what you're hoping with Snapper?
No. Grizzly 2 got released last year.
Oh, it finally got released?
It finally got released. This movie, this movie fell through for, well, I'm not going to spoil why it fell through. It fell through for a number of different reasons, but the creators that came on board for this film still said that like it could be made. And like, quite honestly, like you could make a movie like Jaws or like Crocodile or, you know, Anaconda, any number of creature featured movies in any time period. It's not like they're timeless movies, bottom line. And Snapper is one of those films that you could still make today and still treat like it's in the 80s, especially now that I don't want to say still on that 80s nostalgia kick, but like that 90s nostalgia kick is like still kicking. And this is definitely a movie that could have been released in the 90s. Like it looks just like the trailer that they show for this movie to sell to studios and investors, like it just looked like such a fun time. And the story that they had behind it, like, and how it was going to build, just honestly really makes me hold out hope that someone will watch this documentary and say, I want to invest X amount of dollars to get this like actually like fully made.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Okay. So I'm going to have to put a downer on us for a few minutes. I've got another bad one.
Well, let me go ahead and rate this one. I'm going to give this one a 3.5 out of 5. Like I said, this one is truly fantastic.
It sounds like you enjoyed it, kind of like I enjoyed the documentary about the bus drivers in England putting on the play of Aliens.
Yeah, when we did that, yeah.
Okay.
Ghost shower.
All right. So I have Landlocked. Here's the thing with Landlocked. I'm going to give you a synopsis, and if anybody wants to listen, they can keep listening. But the way this movie is, I don't have much of a choice but to give a couple spoilers, simply because that's the way the movie is. Landlocked is about a kid who goes back to his family's house to clean it out before it gets demolished, and he finds a video camera, a VHS camcorder, that allows him to see into the past. So that's your basis of the movie. Unfortunately, that's pretty much the whole movie. It's a solid concept. It's a concept that I kept watching, expecting something to happen. It's like, hey, this is a really cool idea. This is a horror fest. They have to do something. They had one or two small scenes, but not even enough to count it as horror. Nothing really happened. It just, they had a solid, cool idea and just wasted it. And it was a shame, because reading the description and everything and the synopsis that I just gave, it looked like it could have been really cool, had a cool idea to it. And they wasted it with really just a lack of pretty much anything outside of that. Just a guy walking around looking through a camera in the past.
I feel like that's really some of the most disappointing things when it comes to like expectations for movies, when you as a viewer, or in this case reviewer, can see the potential of a film and it never quite makes it there. It just feels like salt in the wound.
Yeah, they hint at something more, but it's only for like maybe 5 minutes of an hour and 20-minute movie, something like that. It wasn't a long movie at all. It was like an hour, 20 minutes, hour 15, something like that. But like 5 of it, they hint that something more could have gone on, and it was spread out through the whole movie. And it was really a disappointment to get through and be like, wow, nothing happened at all. So it had a cool idea, but because of the way they just threw it out the window and didn't do anything, I'd have to give it a half out of 5.
Are you locking that in?
I'm locking that in, unfortunately, because I wanted to like it. It had a good concept. I played enough Fatal Frame games to know that they can do something cool by looking through the lens of a camera at weird shit, and they failed.
Well, sometimes sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and I'm gonna go with another winner on this one. This is another short film. It's called Driver, and it is a animated feature about a character that basically like is just kind of just going through like a self like discovery of like how to love themselves. And this short film feels like a throwback to MTV's liquid television days, where you had like Aeon Flux, The Max, like even like Beavis and Butthead. Like it feels so at home in that era. It feels like such a beautiful throwback. There's no dialogue at all, but the animation is so strong. The messaging is just so foundational that even without the dialogue, like the director and the artist are able to convey what this character journey is able to do it. And the fact that they do this in like 2.5 minutes is like such a feat. I absolutely adored this little movie, and I really hope to kind of come across other films by these creators whose names I don't have in front of me right now, but I again just really, really adored this movie. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. It's so solid.
All right. So I watched one tonight, actually, before we got together to do this, called Alone with You. Or no, I'm sorry, Father of Flies. A father, his 2 kids. The mother's kind of out of the picture. It's hinted at that she's crazy, possibly an addict of some sort, and a girlfriend of the father's that doesn't really get along with the kids. And the little son has a hearing aid, and is either partially deaf or completely deaf. They never really make that clear. And the dad's constantly leaving on business. And kind of strange things start happening in the house. The stepmom is kind of somewhat neglectful, but almost borderline abusive, controlling, like that level of controlling in some aspects, and just really wants nothing to do with the kids. It has some nods in the way that it plays out to movies like The Others or Sixth Sense, with the way some of the events happen. My big complaint with it is, again, like some of the other movies we've seen, it plays out a little slow and slightly uneventful, but it does have its times where you see hints at hauntings and, hey, what's really going on here? This is kind of weird. And it makes you question what you're watching, like what the actual event, what actually is happening. And it's answered at the end, but there's 1 or 2 little storylines that's left unanswered or unclear as to what's going on. It may have just been something I missed, or it just maybe how they wrote the movie and how it got edited together, because sometimes there are scenes that get cut out on the editing floor that explain certain things. Like The Abyss has a director's cut that's like half hour, 45 minutes longer, and it explains that the aliens have been there the whole time watching. But the theatrical release, they just kind of show up here and there, and you don't know why they're there. And I'm wondering if that's the case with Father of Flies, as if there was things that was cut out that would have explained certain things in the story, especially in the ending. And simply because of that, I give it maybe a 2.5. It was okay. It could have been better. It wasn't bad. If it comes up on your list and you don't know what to watch that night, give it a shot. That's kind of where I put it. 2.5 out of 5. Not great, not bad.
It's that, and those are not like the most ideal films, but like I always feel like when you see something like on like general population, if they go to like Rotten Tomatoes and they're trying to see like whether or not a film is actually worth their time, they're going to be like turned off by like that 50% or below, or even anything that's like not certified fresh, because like they're looking at it. And one of the best ways that I've ever heard it put is when we did our Swamp Thing episode years ago. Swamp Thing, it suffered from behind the scenes drama, and the story ended up being very unevenly paced. But there was still so much good about that series that I still to this day recommend people checking it out. It's like the last couple episodes are kind of frustrating, but the majority of the series as a whole is really good. And it just because a film might not necessarily always be the best in the world, there's still redeemable things, and it definitely sounds like that's what Father of Flies definitely is.
Yeah, it had some interesting stuff in it. It didn't seem. It almost seemed like they didn't know how to tie it all together properly. But it didn't. It didn't make it bad, but it wasn't one that's going to stand out for you. It's one that, if you have nothing else to watch and you're looking for something to watch and come across it, give it a shot. You might like it, might not. That's why it's kind of in the middle of the road at a 2.5 for me.
All right, well that's fair. I mean, you can't win them all.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go ahead and I'll do 2 shorts, since I did a little bit more coverage than you. I'll try and even things out right now with just doing a couple of shorts. First short I'll talk about is called Fire on the Mountain. And Fire on the Mountain is basically this like story of a modern day witch trial gone wrong. And the thing that's really hard to judge about critiquing short films is when you have a film that has so much potential and it ends before it feels like it even begins. And Fire on the Mountain is 100% that. Fire on the Mountain, it ends with this like just jaw-dropping ending that you're like, man, like I want to see so much more. It feels like this short film is kind of almost like a concept footage that is trying to sell an audience or sell something on this concept, to do a like almost kind of like a witch trial type movie. And honestly, I really dug this movie, but I really wanted so much more from it, but I can't hold that against it. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. The imagery is really good. It's a really solid little film. But I wanted so much more. So I have fingers crossed. If any of the filmmakers involved in that production are listening, please, I would love to see this done on a feature-length film.
Well, I mean, they took what was the movie Lights Out, was actually based on an internet short, so you never know. It could happen.
Yeah, and I hope so, man. Like I've come across a decent number of these shorts, and definitely have also seen that as well. That I think would be kind of cool just to see this on there. But my next one is called Verified, and Verified is it's a really simple concept. Basically, a young female has a desire to be a social media influencer, and on her rise to become an influencer and to be verified on Instagram, she actually gets bit by a zombie on a live stream that she's doing, and subsequently turns into a zombie herself. The concept is it's fairly simple. It's well executed. My only problem with this movie is just it felt really forgettable, which really pains me to say, because like I said, like it's delivered so simply. It's delivered really simply. It's delivered really eloquently as well, and the slow transformation is really good. The practical effects are really solid. Even the acting is really good. There's just not a whole lot that is memorable about this movie. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 3 out of 5. Just like I said, it's a good movie. It's a solid film, but it's just there's something about it that to me, like, it just kind of feels like it has an emptiness about it. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched a movie like that and you're just kind of like, it's a good movie, but I can't quite put it into words about like why I can't like love it more than I do.
I'm trying to think. Actually, Lights Out might be one of those. I was a fan of the short, and then they put out the whole movie, and it didn't have the soul of the short. Yeah, it didn't have the soul of the short. It was still cool, but yeah, I could see that.
Fair enough. All right, what do you got next, man?
Okay. Alone with You. I mentioned it a minute ago by accident, but Alone with You is one I'm slightly conflicted over and a little upset about my rating.
That's never good.
You'll get it in a minute. So it's a woman is at her apartment trying to arrange a romantic night for her girlfriend who's returning from a business trip. She gets stuck in the apartment, and it is very clear that some sort of haunting is taking place. I'm a fan of Silent Hill. Always have been since the very beginning. Love the series of games. I accept the movies for what they are and enjoy the movies. This almost feels like a movie of Silent Hill: The Room, where you're basically stuck in your apartment and stuff starts happening. That feels like the concept they base this on. For a multitude of reasons, and the way everything builds and the story, and it's a Silent Hill kind of ending when you find out what really is going on and what has happened and really transpired. It's like, wow, these guys must have been fans of Silent Hill. And the whole movie takes place inside the apartment. There's a couple little flashes here and there to other locations, but almost in its entirety, it's in the apartment. It's got its jump scares. It's got its traditional effects. I don't even think there was any CGI, or at least none that I can remember. My complaint, and this is why I give it a 3 out of 5, and I want to give it better, but about the first half hour or so has an issue with pacing. It's a decent pacing, then it slows down. Then it's decent, then it slows down. And it kind of jumps around a little bit until it really falls into itself and starts presenting what you're seeing. And then it really kind of picks up and takes off. That opening pacing may be enough for some people to shut it off. What am I watching? This isn't any good, and turn it off. If you make it through that, it's a pretty solid movie. If you're a fan of Silent Hill and more specifically Silent Hill: The Room, it's a cool movie. It's that opening pacing is what hurts it enough for me to give it a 3 out of 5.
I mean, it's still a solid film.
Yeah, it's one of the better ones we've seen out of some of these festivals we've covered this year. It's just that opening maybe 15, 20 minutes, because it's not a long movie. It's another one that wasn't but like an hour and 20 minutes. So that pacing could be enough to turn it off for some people.
Well, tight. So my next one is it's kind of right around the same ballpark that you have, and that is a feature-length film called Lair. And the concept of Lair basically is this guy that runs an Airbnb is essentially trying to he's basically conned a whole lot of families into believing that they are haunted by demons, and he basically fakes everything. And so it's kind of almost like a reverse Conjuring, where instead of trying to free the family, this guy is basically he opens up an Airbnb with the hopes of having this family haunted and him being able to catch it on video and then become rich off of it.
It sounds like it should have been a comedy.
You laugh at that, and that concept almost kind of becomes the subplot, because the majority of this film it focuses on the family that ends up staying in this Airbnb, and essentially, like, it is a newly out lesbian couple and one of the women's daughters, kind of like, again, to take a page out of 645, they're essentially trying to recover from like a hard season of life and hoping that this vacation will kind of start anew. And the tension is really well placed between both the demonic possession proposal of the caretaker and the tension that this family is experiencing. My biggest issue with this is that both plots seem to be competing for screen time. There comes a point where this, instead of becoming a supernatural horror film, it transforms itself into like this family drama dynamic, and it just stays there for like 35 minutes. And like, there are some whispers of like how we are going to get the demon, but there's not a whole lot of stuff that is actually focused and fixated on using that tension of the family drama to kind of run parallel with the invoking of the demonic spirit. Like, they're on two opposite playing fields. And perhaps what's most frustrating about this film is every single actor and actress in this movie is so freaking good. Like, there's not one bad performance in this movie, and like, out of every film that I've talked about thus far from this film that I've seen, I might have like certain performers that I like in other movies, but this film has to be the most solidly acted film. Like, I mean, these actors really disappear into these roles. And I can't say the same for a lot of these other films, but what annoys me so much is that competing vision that director Adam Ethan Crowell seems to present. And I will say, though, like, the last like 10 minutes of this movie bring a lot of redemption to the movie as a whole, because it's playing with almost interlinear storytelling, but it really works to kind of bring you to the edge of your seat and really kind of take you for a loop and a spin. But you really have to be invested enough to stick with this movie.
It sounds like they had two ideas and just kind of stuck them together because they couldn't figure out how to flesh them out.
They could have absolutely fleshed them out. I think that the way that you could have done that is you could have spent a little less time on the family drama dynamics and a little bit more focusing on like the demonic presence and running those stories parallel to actually use the demonic spirit to kind of essentially create the tension between the families, between the family members. So you have essentially like, as the family is starting to fall apart, it's not just a natural tension, but it's a demonic tension. And that's where I feel like this movie loses a lot of its potential. I'm still going to go ahead and give it a 3 out of 5. I still think it's a really solid movie. It's, like I said, terrific performances, great ideas, just not a solid execution.
Gotcha. So I'm down to my last movie. I watched one called Wicked Games. In essence, it's the whole Most Dangerous Game plot. It falls close to a similar story to like Ready or Not, but doesn't perform as well. Rich dude meets a girl, brings him back to his family's home. They've only been together a few months, and then they start trying to hunt her. Like I said, it's not on par with like Ready or Not or anything like that. It's still a good movie. All traditional effects, which I'm a massive fan of. The story is all there. It's I mean, you can't do much with a story like that. It's not going to be super complicated. There's no Satan's not coming to kill anybody. It's just a rich family hunting people that they bring back to their house. I mean, I really don't have much bad to say about it. It's some of the acting is a little questionable. Some of the dialogue is a little questionable. And that's really its biggest takeaway. It was fun to watch. It was fun to watch.
Could you clarify what you mean by like questionable? Does that mean that does that mean like from like a writing standpoint, are you meaning like ethical or like just like not terribly like written kind of terribly?
So some of the dialogue was a bit more wordy and drawn out than it really needed to be. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
It was almost like they were fighting to extend the movie out because, again, I came across a couple of these movies that were just like an hour 10, hour 15 minutes. And this was another one of those. And some of the dialogue scenes were a bit overly wordy, and it felt almost like they were trying to get the screen time extended out a little bit more. It really didn't clarify anything. Some of it just extended scenes out that they already made clear what was going on, what was the purpose of all this, why are they doing it, things like that. They just kind of kept going with certain stuff longer than they really needed to. That's all. It's not a bad movie by any means. It kind of feels like one of those sci-fi straight to TV slashers.
Hey, I mean, some of those were really are good. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. It's good. It's not great. I'd give it a 3 out of 5, 3.5 out of 5. Sorry.
All right. Well, I still have 5 movies. I definitely went overboard for this because like I said, I have a little bit more time than you. I'm married, I don't have any kids, so and I'm in a position to where like I can do it. So I'm just gonna kind of run down my list real quick and just kind of talk about it. First two films I'm gonna talk about in this speed round. You guys this Saturday can actually catch an interview episode with both of them that I'll be doing, and that is the writer director of Bad Girls, and it's Christopher Bickle. And then also I sat down with Devin Doss and Josh Wallace, who are both the writers, and Josh is the director and Devin is the leading man of the black comedy Keeping Company. So I gave my thoughts earlier this year on Bad Girls. Bad Girls currently sits at in my top 5 favorite films of the year. Basically, 3 strippers decide to go Bonnie and Clyde on people and just go and just decide to do a cross country just tour of just bananas, bonkers stuff, kidnapping rock stars, knocking over banks and everything. I mean, like, the comedy is so rich in this film. The action's really great. The score is really good. It's a interesting mix of disco and metal, and thrash metal at that. And you guys can kind of hear Chris talk about that particular thing this Saturday. But yeah, this movie for me is a solid 4.5 out of 5. I absolutely adore this film. I've shown it to Micah, who is the co-host of That's High Praise. The two of us watched it earlier this year, and I have to say that, like, I just absolutely front to back love this movie more and more every time that I watched it. I think it started at like probably like the 20s for like best movie of the year, and every time I watch it, it quickly just climbs up higher and higher. It's a great movie, and I own it on Blu-ray, so if that tells you any much of how much I love it. Second movie, like I said, is called Keeping Company, and basically it's such a hard movie to describe because it walks the line so smoothly between being a horror movie, a comedy, and a satire, all within the same sphere. And it does a really great job at balancing each of those genres to blend together to make something quite unique. And basically, the film tells the story of 2 insurance salesmen that get involved into a hit and run and end up ultimately becoming kidnapping victims for the guy that was on the opposite side of that accident. And like I said, the it's so smart. It has a lot of familiar face. It has a few familiar faces in it, including Corey's dad, who's, I believe, his name is William Russ. Yeah, from Boy Meets World, and Andy Buckley, the people will remember from The Office as David Wallace. The writing in it, again, super smart, super funny. And the gags in this film are actually far and few between, but when they get there, like, it's really brutal, and there's a really just dynamic twist at the end of this movie that just kind of brings into this, really doubles down on the horror satire aspects of this movie. So I'm going to also give that one a 4.5. I really, really loved this movie. This is the second time I got to watch it because I got to also see it for Genre Blast last month, and again, if you guys get a chance to see this movie, I highly recommend it. My next one is going to be called The Free Fall. And Mark, this is actually a movie that I think you would like. Without kind of giving any spoilers about it, basically a woman wakes up from amnesia and is kind of basically trying to put the pieces of her life back together. And the reason why I say this is a solid little movie is because they do enough without it that kind of like give you like a little bit of like feedback and kind of setting up how she might in turn actually be going through, or like what she's actually doing as far as going through amnesia, and kind of like her journey to kind of like discover, or I guess like rediscover like who she actually is done really well. The performances are really, really good, and perhaps the scene, the actor that really kind of seals this deal is actually Shawn Ashmore, who people might remember from played Iceman and the X-Men trilogy from the early 2000s. He is so creepy, so intense, and so charismatic in this movie that it is almost unfathomable. It's a really solid performance from him. It's a movie that I think is among probably the best movies that he's ever done. But this movie, for me, I think that it's paced at a really steady. It sets itself at a really steady pace, and it keeps that pace. And like I said, there's enough clues that they kind of give you as she's basically trying to rediscover who she is, that by the time it's actually revealed, it just completely throws you off because you don't expect what's coming in the last act of this movie. And I really, really loved it. There are some sequences in this film that just kind of feel out of place, and because they feel out of place, like it really kind of really wish that the screen time could have been better used to kind of explore like her amnesia, or like her relationship to her husband, and kind of also to the gardener, the groundskeeper, I guess is a better term, because like I said, they hint at it really well, but some of that stuff could have been better explored. So it doesn't always use its time wisely. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a 3.5 out of 5. And last two are both short films. The first one is Witch Hunt. Basically, it tells the story of this internet troll that basically gets punked by a couple of his victims from previous attacks, and they basically get their revenge on him. And it's such a smart little film as far as like its like use of satire, but also like its social commentary is really strong. And I know that you don't always like the social commentaries, but I think this film does it in a way that is subtle enough and it's modern enough to kind of really be I don't want to say a product of its time, but also but the fact that it's just done really well. It's acted really well, and I just really, really loved this. It kind of uses the allegory of witch hunting to kind of bring the knowledge of of kind of like, facing your demons. I'm probably butchering it how it sounds, but it's a really solid little movie. I really hope that they'll put it on like YouTube, or like it'll get a chance to become on like Alter soon, because it's It's a lot like Audio Guide, which I know is a movie that is a short film you probably haven't seen, but Audio Guide is a really tremendous piece of cinema that basically looks at the mortality through the lens of a art museum voiceover. And that's what this film does. And I think it just blends those two things really well together. So I'm actually going to give this a 5 out of 5. I think this is our first one that we got on this show that's a perfect, and it's not the last one, because my next one, spoiler alert, is also going to be a 5 out of 5. And this one, for a limited time only, as of this recording, you can actually watch on YouTube. It's a short film that basically looks at the subject of prejudice through the eyes of a society where you are either a clown or you're a mime. And there is a masked killer that is coming to knock off the clowns one smile at a time. And this movie is so quirky. It is so wholesome. And it is just so original that I honestly watched it and immediately wanted to watch it again. I just love the originality of it, and I love how it's also based in this. I don't even know how to say it. Just such a timely subject matter of, whether you look at it as, racism or classism or sexism or, just a number of other things that, groups that we could talk about, prejudice, whether you talk about black versus white or rich versus poor, straight versus LGBT. There's so many different sectors for what this movie could be an allegory for, and it fits every single one of them. And it just kind of demonstrates and it shows you how deep hate can run, and also how people can kind of, mislook at the subject of hate. And I think this film is just a really, really smart in that way. And it has a punk rock flair to it that I really thought was cool. So that is called You Missed a Spot. And I will be sure to actually include a link to this movie, because it is actually on YouTube when we post this episode. So you guys can just check the links in the descriptions below. But
how would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Mark and I didn't have a whole lot of crossover on this festival, but we did have two films that we did crossover. And the first one we're going to be talking about is a black and white movie called Seeds. And Mark, what is Seeds about?
I pretty much described it all. We actually caught some flack from the director on this one. But Seeds is, let's see how best to describe this.
Well, I will read the synopsis via Letterboxd.
Yeah, let's go that route.
It says, quote, Maka, A grieving mother is feeling isolated with grief and holds on to her Catholic faith while her husband Andrew dives back into his work as a distraction. Against her wishes, he leaves to study an old New England cult that's religion is based around the metaphysical properties of the apple. The secrets of these metaphysical properties that Cardinal Simbaldi is very interested in discovering for his own use. And as they rush to make these discoveries, the cult has deadly plans of their own. End quote.
Okay. So, yeah, you've got and I've noticed this a lot with a lot of these movies we've covered at various festivals, that they always tend to have almost a hysterical, crazy mother female character. And she's the wife of the priest that's been left these seeds to take to this group as something to do with some inheritance. I like cult movies. This has all the things to be a cool cult movie, except the acting and the writing. It really seemed like he leaned heavily on the artistic black and white imagery than acting and writing.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you, just in a little bit sense of that. This film is so sound in its artistic visual aesthetic is what I'll say, that it neglects the basic functions of what makes a movie a movie. And so much of that is, as we were talking about just in the synopsis alone, the synopsis can become very just overly complicated for no reason. And that's kind of where I think the film lost me as a viewer, is the fact that because of how complex this film can be at times, there's so much going on that you really don't ever care about these characters. You don't ever care about the fact that this woman is grieving. You don't ever care about the fact that her husband is basically I don't want to say a deadbeat, but he's like not around to kind of support his wife during this grieving process, so he leaves for a project. And then you have this Simbaldi dude that like just kind of shows up when the plot's necessary. And I just feel like this movie is it's just freaking busy all the time. And like these three arcs, I feel like there's nowhere for them to go, because they all, it feels like three people essentially trying to fit out the door at the same time.
Yeah, it's part of it to me though was, like I said, the acting. It was very dry, very bland, very monotone. The husband, who was the priest that was going on his journey, he was more concerned with his work than his wife, and which is kind of almost uncharacteristic for somebody who's supposed to be like a man of God and stuff. I know typically with preachers and priests and stuff, the church and God comes first, but this was almost like his wife was an afterthought and almost more of a nuisance in his way. Did you get that at all?
Yeah, and if you're going to look at it from that way, like the Bible actually talks about, like, when it comes to like leaders, like there are like certain requirements if you're going to take up position in the church of authority of any kind, whether you're a elder, deacon, or a pastor. And it actually specifically says, I believe it's in James, but I could be wrong. It talks about how, like, you know, if you are going to be a leader in the church, but yet you basically you have to have order within your home before you bring it into the house of God, because if you can't create order in your own home, how can you expect it in the house of God? And so it seems almost very contradictory in that the way that the character is said it, and like that to me, like that didn't really bother me a whole lot, but it just kind of seemed like a caricature of what we've kind of come to know for pastors, where pastors in the media are always kind of portrayed as being like either overly religious or just overly judgmental. And that's kind of where this caricature, this version of a pastor seemed to be.
Yeah, especially in like horror movies, they make pastors and priests out to be just the most craziest people, extremists or whatever. And he seemed to care more about his career and his studies really than anything else. And I mean, I grew up in a church. You grew up in the church. And it seemed out of characteristic for the character. It didn't seem right for the character being around preachers and priests and stuff growing up. It didn't seem fitting, and it played more of a distraction than anything else for me. It didn't seem believable.
So for me, like it's not even a sense of like believability, because like I know that like I have some days where like you talk about like depression or like even in his case grief, it can manifest into many different ways. So like for me, like it's been a while since I've experienced grief as an adult, but I would say even like for my depression, like when I have those days of being not the most mentally healthy, what I tend to do is sometimes I will divert my attention into escapism. So I will spend too much time on social media. I'll watch a movie. I will just deep dive into something for, maybe something for victims, but that is so that I don't have to face the current reality. And so to me, like I took it as he's not necessarily looking at to me, he's not necessarily looking at this assignment as, oh, I need to abandon my wife because I'm a terrible man of God. But to me, I looked at it as he's also grieving. So his process, instead of dealing with the grief, he's going to dive into his work, and he's going to be this caricature of a father of a man that doesn't want to confront his feelings. And that to me is kind of how I took it, is that they're going to the stereotype of men don't like to talk about their feelings.
And another thing that got me is the way it played out. Like I said earlier, a lot of the movies we've seen recently have had like hysterical women or crazy women or whatever, and that's how they're portrayed in the movie. And one of the first scenes you see with them talking is him telling his wife, "Oh, you know how you get. Did you take your medicine? Make sure to take your medicine." And it plays into that whole thing. And I don't know. There was lots of things like that in that movie, between the very bland, dry, monotone acting and little story aspects like that just really turned the movie off for me.
I want to kind of echo some of the things that you're talking about. The monotone, this movie definitely lacks emotion, especially a film that is riddled in grief and like religion. Like those are two subjects that invoke reactions, a emotional response, and this film gives us none of that. And if you go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I really grieved in this movie is the hour and a half that I lost watching it.
Same.
Yeah.
100% agree. And the only, if we do get any type of emotion outside of the bland monotone, is this like overly acted response that is something that you would expect from like Birdemic or The Room or Showgirls, like these like very just blatantly terrible movies. This movie embraces that spirit in either one of those ways, and that's one of the most. That's another frustrating thing about this movie, is that, you know, it's either very underly acted or it's very overly acted.
And both of us with this movie, we saw it and looked at it, was like, oh, this sounds cool. We're going to check this out. And we both pretty much had the same reaction for a lot of the same reasons and some differing reasons. But like I said, we caught some flack from the director when we posted a little brief snippet of what we thought on it. But it had the ability and the base story to be something really cool. And it almost made it on par for me to like a high school drama play.
Man, I don't know. I feel like I've given it too much credit. I would say like middle school, man.
Maybe I had a bad acting class at my high school.
So, I mean, yeah, this movie, like, it sacrifices a lot of the basic functions of what makes a film a film. And it decides to look pretty instead of, you know, I don't know, actually being a compelling piece of cinema. So, Mark, what are you going to give this one?
I'm going to have to go with the 0.5 out of 5. I mean, even some of the pretty was nothing more than like a poncho and a dollar mask from the dollar store for some of the costume. It just that I don't know really anything appealing about this movie.
I'm going to go a little bit more than you. I'm going to go 1. Just because I really did. I think this film, through the artistic imagery, is really able to embody almost a what's the word I'm looking for? A atmospheric approach to its storytelling, and that for me is something I really enjoy. I really did enjoy about it. But yeah, outside of that, this movie is just void of any purpose. It takes a really compelling thing and it just throws it out the window. So let's get into our last film of the day, and that is Take Back the Night. And if you guys would like to hear me talk with the director, you guys can go to YouTube. I'll provide a link in the description below. I talked to Gia Elliott she is the co-writer and director of Take Back the Night at Genre Blast. So this is a second viewing for me. This is a film that I would regard as a fairly important film, and we'll talk about why in just a second. But basically, this tells the story of a social media influencer that at one night after a party ends up becoming assaulted by a entity, and she is spending the rest of the movie trying to prove her allegations correct. And Mark, this was a first time viewing for you. What did you think about this movie?
Okay. The movie got its point across. I see what it was trying to do. And I think I even messaged you at one point. I see what it's trying to do. My issue with it, like I said, it got its point across. It did what it was supposed to do. But my issue was that it looked for pretty much every stereotype phrase you've heard in reporting and almost exaggerated it. And again, I get what they were going for. I understand that was the purpose, to put a highlight on assault and women getting assaulted and some of the issues and things you hear. Oh, she brought it on herself. Maybe it's what she was doing. Oh, she drank too much. She did things like that. It made its point very clear. I thought it was a bit over exaggerated. And then And I think part of it might have been the way they ended the movie, might have played into that for me. Outside of that, again, it's not a bad movie, and it accomplished what they wanted to. It just, I think it could have been done a little better.
I am going to see your rebuttal and raise you a Bruce Wayne quote, and pull from Batman Begins, where he says, people need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy. And I think that when you talk about things like depression and the fact that this film basically opens up on a woman trying to take her own life because of this event, you need that's what you need. You need that dramatic example. And I think this movie does that in spades. I think, to your point, I think that it's not, to me, it's not over exaggerated. I don't look at this movie and I don't think it's overly exaggerated. I have my own problems with this movie for a number of other reasons, but I think for me, when it comes to the balancing of the sexual assault, I think it gives you a good insight into some of the things that we don't really consider when you're talking about the legality of cases like this. And Gia talked about it in the interview, where she basically, they talked and sat down with lawyers and organizations that specialized in these types of cases to kind of talk about why, when you look at the statistics for, actual, like, the fact that I think it's like 60 to 90 seconds, it's one of the two, there are someone is sexually assaulted. Every 9 minutes, that victim is a kid. That's so many assaults that go down. And those are all the ones that we actually know. And then you have, on the flip side, you have the justice system. Only one, I think it's like 10 out of like every 1,000. It's been a while since I've looked at them, so if I'm not getting the statistics right, please bear with me. But like, that's a lot. Like it's 10 out of like every 1,000 or something crazy like that. That there's such a low statistic that actually will see justice and will actually see the inside of a jail cell. And for me, like, I think this film captures and introduces its audience to some of the things that we don't think about. The fact that you basically have to go through this really long ordeal of questioning and basically like living and reliving that event over and over again, not only in the trauma that comes attached to that, but also the legality side of it as well. And I think this film does a really good job at capturing both angles of that.
Oh, and like I said, I get that. I see what it was trying to say. I mean, I think they one of the cities they got to looking at here within the last couple of years and found something like, it was something like 30,000 rape kits or something that hadn't even been tested or processed. And there definitely is an issue with all this stuff. Not arguing that, not disputing that. It's just, my issue was the way it was done in the movie just came across to me. And again, it may have had to do with the way they ended the movie, as a bit exaggerated. That's all. It accomplished what it was going for. It brought attention to what they wanted. It just, that was the only issue for me.
I talked about this in my Genre Blast review. I talked about it when I interviewed Gia. This movie, for me, I feel like accomplishes for sexual assault what the Babadook did for grief, where it's a literal manifestation for this woman that goes through this ordeal. And she uses her platform as a way to kind of bring change, and I love how the change brings. I think that Jane has this very fascinating arc throughout the entirety of the movie, and I think it's probably one of the strongest things about this movie. And for me, though, like the thing that kind of holds this back from being a film that is going to be not to say that this film isn't good, but I think what holds it back from being great is some of the language that's used in here. The fact that they're calling a monster literally a monster. I think that's kind of the lingo we hear a lot when we hear things talked about people like Bill Cosby or like Harvey Weinstein, like, he's a monster, so on and so forth. And I kind of feel like I would have rathered them, and this is coming from me as a poet, like if I'm going to convey a idea, and I can take one idea and convey it over multiple different lines using multiple different similes, metaphors, or even verbiage. I think this movie sticking with one thing is kind of one of its downfall, and kind of is not the strongest idea of it. And then some of the acting too, like I feel like this movie has like very mountain high top performances, but then it also has those very kind of like lackluster, almost borderline like emotionless responses from some of the characters. I don't know if you caught on to that.
Yeah, I did. There's a little, with the way the movie was presented, there was a little kind of conflict on some of the ways some of the things were presented. Like you talked about the entity or whatever, and they kept talking about it as a monster and this and that. They're trying to bring light and attention to assault and the things women go through involved with it. But they're trying to do it in the aspect of a horror movie. And they either needed to just go ahead and make it more of like a psychological thriller with her being attacked by a guy, or stick to the horror side dealing with the entity. Not kind of try to ride the road down the middle of the two. Like you were saying, they kept referring to it as a monster and this and that. And that kind of takes away, almost makes it more of a distraction than as a character in the movie. That's kind of the way I felt about it.
No, and I think that to me, I think we're on the same page about, and honestly, like, and I think that might be some of the just things for me being a writer, and kind of also being someone that is creatively active, whether I'm podcasting or writing poetry or even writing stories. And to me, I think that this movie, in some ways, in that framage of just kind of using that continual same language, it kind of, I can start to see your over exaggeration point, because it's the same exact sentiment that's being made. I think there's a point in the film where she's posting something on social media and says, monsters are real, something along those lines. And to me, I kind of almost felt like the sister did. You can't go on television, you can't do this with, and say, monsters, because like, I think, call it for what it is. Like, I think, you could have said like, predator, even like a demon, or like there's so many other words and things you can say. And I don't want to like get hung up on this one point, but I think this movie, it's paced really well. It's got, like I said, it the majority of the time the performances are really solid, really top tier. And I think the imagery and kind of like even like the monster, the look of the monster is also something that's really dope as well. That's why I kind of make the comparison for the Babadook, but I would definitely recommend it to check out the interview we did with Gia to kind of hear a little bit more about the creative process and about the monster as well.
Yeah, again, it wasn't bad. It was little things, and it may seem like nitpicking, and some people may just take it as me being a guy that didn't like it because of the topic. But it when you review a movie, it's different than just sitting down and watching it. You almost end up having to nitpick little things. And it was little things in this movie that just kind of made it a little bit less than what it could have been.
Yeah, for sure. Like those little things, like you're saying, like they add up, and for in some ways, like I would kind of compare like the little things in this movie, kind of like the way that when you look at like BVS theatrical cut versus the director's cut, there are quite literally like 4 seconds taken off here, 7 seconds taken off here, but those seconds matter and they completely change the way that you look at a film. And I think that's the way that it is here. Like there are, especially on a second viewing, like for me, like there were definitely things that kind of came off a little bit more, a little better, but also kind of like a little bit worse at the same time. So, like I said, like this movie it's still really solid. I would say it's probably one of the most compelling and important films that we've seen come out of horror this year. So I definitely would say check it out if you come across it. Let's go ahead and run this through our Rorschach rating scale. 0 to 5, Mark. Last film of the night. What would this film give? What would you give this film?
A 3. 3 out of 5.
Okay. I'm gonna go a little bit heavier than yours and go a 3.5 out of 5. I think this movie, it does a lot of really smart things, but it also has those, again, it's just those little things that add up. So make sure that you guys check out any of these movies. You guys, so many we covered on this film. But we're going to be back this Saturday talking with some of the talent involved in these movies. Once again, it's going to be Christopher Bickle, the writer-director of Bad Girls, as well as Devin Toss, the co-writer and star, and Josh Wallace, who is the co-writer and director of Keeping Company. Mark, where can people find you online, my friend?
I'm just a nerd that paints miniatures on Instagram at Titanium Juggernaut Painting.
You guys can find me. I am on TikTok at Gentleman Ghostface. I'm also on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains, over on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. Plus, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net where you guys can get access to not only all of our social media, more podcasts like this, movie reviews, Patreon, but also most importantly, our mental health resource library. So thank you guys for hanging out with us and talking all things indie. And until next time, remember that the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you. Have a good night, guys.